couple of years ago, I bought this cheap projector, really just out of curiosity, to see if nowadays these cheap off-brand projectors are actually capable of being used, or if they're still like how they used to be 10, 15 years ago, where they were basically scams that were basically unusable. And it was quite interesting, because I actually found that this projector is perfectly capable. It's not remotely as good as a higher end projector from the likes of Optoma or a big name brand. You wouldn't want to use it in a high end home cinema or like a professional business setting. But for just a fun thing to have at home for occasional movie nights, just to get a big screen for the novelty factor, it was actually okay. So if you're interested in seeing more information about it in general and seeing it working, check that video out. I'll put a card up. And in particular, it's definitely worth watching that video because there's a few settings I had to change to make this thing actually really usable. The colours were all off until I changed some settings. But yeah, I picked up this projector just to sort of really see what it was like out of curiosity. And I kept meaning to do a teardown of it just because I kind of want to see how they can make this so cheap. This only cost about £150. They don't seem to sell this exact model nowadays, but it cost £150 when I bought it. And you can still get this model just under different brands, so I'll put a link in the description to something that looks similar, although they seem to have maybe made some slight tweaks since I bought this one, so it might not be exactly the same. But yeah, for £150, and you're getting an actually natively 1080p LED projector, that's really cheap. So I'm just kind of curious to see really what's inside it and how they've made it work for so cheap. So yeah, this is the projector. And this one's branded as Elephas. This is the Elephas Q9. Although it's one of those things, loads of different brands sell the exact same product. Generally, if you look up most brands, they'll call this the Q9. So if you search for like Q9 projector, you'll find these. But this was branded by Elephas. They don't seem to sell this one anymore, but other brands still do. And yeah, it's just a relatively cheap LED projector, or LCD projector. So you can see under there, you've got a lens. Around this side, you've got some built-in speakers, which actually weren't terrible. You've got some focusing adjustments. This will be interesting to take a look at because you've got this one that adjusts the lens, and then this weird flip switch here that adjusts the keystone. That in my original video I got confused by this, but I've now figured out what this is for. So we'll talk about that when we take it apart, because it's kind of an interesting, the way this focusing works and the sort of compromises they've used here are all down to the fact they've used a low power LED, so we'll talk about that. Around the back, you'll see we have some inputs, so a couple of HDMI inputs which are labelled HD, which I suspect is a way of not having to pay royalties to the people that own the HDMI trademark, the sort of consortium or whatever it is. Infrared for the remotes. AV, there's a breakout cable that I've probably lost somewhere, but a little breakout cable from 3.5mm to composite. Headphone jack, USB, VGA, IEC power input, some buttons on the top. And then around this side is just a couple of big vents and heat sinks behind them for cooling the LED and the rest of the projector. So that's a quick tour of the outside of it. I'm not going to dwell too much on really the outside just because I've done a full review of this. But what we really want to do is take this apart. So if you flip it over, you'll see on the bottom we have a bunch of screws that I'll take out. Label here. Caution, do not open. No user serviceable parts inside. Well, we'll see about that. Do not stare into the beam. And this font here has always amused me with the written projector, because this is so similar to the font that's used in the Pioneer logo. Like when I first saw it, I thought it was the identical font, and I'm looking at a Pioneer logo across the room. It's so similar. It's maybe slightly different. I think on the Pioneer logo the P doesn't quite join up, but whereas it does here, but it's such a similar font. But yeah, all we'll do is take the screws out the bottom of this, and then we'll open it up and see what's inside. Okay, so I'm now loosened off all the screws so we can get the top off. Also, you might see down the back there's a bunch of little scuffs and dents along the edge. I had a bit of an accident with this. I had it standing on a projector stand, and I think I was using like an HDMI over Cat6 extender or something, and it wasn't quite working. I was having all sorts of issues. So I'm running around trying to fix it all, tripped over the Ethernet cable, ripped the network jack off the wall, and then caused this to come flying off the stand while it was powered on and bounce across the laminate floor. Yet it completely survived, which was really interesting. So that's another interesting thing with these cheap projectors, is obviously it's presumably such a simple design inside with very simple optics, nothing that fancy. It's almost quite durable because of that. Like, the plastics aren't that well made, and it's not like it's built like a tank, but I think just by virtue of it being such a simple device, it completely survived that. Like, had this been a sort of a traditional projector with a, metal halide lamp or something, especially when it was powered on, that wouldn't have survived. I mean, those can break if you just move them when they're hot, let alone drop them when they're running. It'd be interesting to see if this was like a modern high-end LED projector, what it would do, or how would that survive it with the more complicated optics and potential autofocus type stuff they have. But yeah, if you see any bashes on it, that's what happened, but still works fine. So that should be all the screws out. So in theory, we should be able to lift the top off. I think there's one screw I've missed. The screws are recessed really far down in here, so you can't really get them out easily. That's the right one, yeah. Get that screw out there. So that's it now. Yep, that's it. Let's take the top off. Is there a cable? Yep, there's a cable going to this board for the button, so we'll just disconnect that cable there. And that's the inside. So, top case, nothing really to report, just buttons and a little board that presumably just breaks out to those buttons, so nothing that interesting there. But if we look underneath, we can see the internals. And as you can see, there's not much to it, so it should be quite easy to tear down. But this is quite interesting just to see how few components you can use to make a projector that actually works. So let's go in a bit closer and take a look at what we have. So here we are inside the projector. So what we'll do is we'll go sort of look at all the parts, and then we'll start taking more out and go down layer by layer and get more deeper into it. But obviously the first thing you'll see here is this main board. And there isn't really much on it, apart from this one chip here. And that is a model number of a TSUM V53 RUU-21. And looking this up, it's literally a generic LCD driver with 2 HDMI inputs. So essentially all this is a generic chip designed for just LCD monitors, basic TVs without tuners presumably, and all that sort of stuff. And it's got a couple of HDMI inputs, presumably composite as well. It's got an IR input, so the IR will also go from that for the remote control that I've not got here, but it's got a remote for it. And that'll drive the LCD. And that seems to be used in a lot of other basic products. For example, if you've ever looked on AliExpress, you can get those cheap LCD driver boards, where basically it's a PCB that can connect out to an LCD display over something like LVDS or EDP. And those boards often have these chips. And likewise, they'll usually have a couple of HDMI inputs, some composite inputs, and come with an IR remote control. So that's all this is. It's just a standard, off-the-shelf, generic chip for driving LCDs. Presumably this has all sort of on-screen display type firmware as well. It'll presumably have USB media playback, all in this one chip. So I suppose that's one way they've kept the cost down. There's no custom chips and complicated, presumably even custom firmware on this. They're just using an off-the-shelf part that's presumably got firmware already available for it. Other than that, there's not really much on this board. Interestingly, there's like a sort of pad here for something else. Don't know what that would be for. I've seen some of the newer models of this list that they have Wi-Fi, so potentially there's a space there to put some sort of Wi-Fi module that would maybe either talk to this chip, or it would kind of take over from this chip and provide a smart interface and just interface with this with video, I don't know. But yeah, there's a sort of pad there clearly for something that could be added on. Although interestingly up here there's no power supply. I think that's down the front, so we'll need to get deeper in it to see that. Then you've got all these sort of cables snaking all over the place, kind of taped down. These are obviously going to speakers that are over here. You've got stereo speakers, even though they're on the same side. A couple other cable, that's presumably power coming up to this board. That's the IR over there. And then obviously we've got this big ribbon cable here, and that's going to be the LCD. So we can kind of just about see down here, I suspect this is going to be the LCD, and there's like a couple of screws that let you get the LCD out. So what we'll need to do is take this apart. So what I'll do is I'll go around, I think I'll need to probably just start disconnecting all those cables. I've seen a couple are stuck in, so I might be able to hinge it back without disconnecting all the cables that are glued in. If not, I'll just need to break the glue off. Be very careful with the flat flex, get that off. So I'm just going to disconnect all these cables, get these screws out, lift this board out of the way, and then get in even deeper. So yeah, we should be able to just remove this ribbon cable. Don't know what type of connector this is, that one. Shouldn't have forced that, but it seems fine. And that's going to come out there, so that's the ribbon cable for the LCD. Be interested to see if I can get any sort of model numbers off that. So get the rest of these out and dig down deeper. I also looked up the model number here, this HV606PJ. I could find other mention of this online, but it's always in reference to the PCB for this particular projector. So I'm not sure if this board's using other projectors. It may be custom for this particular projector, just using an off-the-shelf chipset. So yeah, let's get these cables disconnected and go down deeper. Okay, so I've removed all the screws holding this board in, disconnected all the cables, I couldn't get these two out, they're glued in, so I'm hoping I can flip it over and work out why they're not coming out, because I tried cutting the glue with a Stanley knife, but it didn't seem to come out. These ones they were glued, but they just pulled off, so that was fine. And there was this, what's just literally an earth connection, so I've just disconnected that. And that literally goes down to the earth connection, the IC cable, as it comes in. So now, if we carefully pull this off, we can flip the board over, see if these will unplug now. I can kind of be a bit more safe and not try. Yeah, there we go. I was worried about forcing it and breaking the connector, so I wanted to do it when I could really see the other side of the board. So that'll come off there, that'll come off there, and there's the board. So basically nothing on that side, it's all on that side. But interestingly, when I was talking about this maybe being for like an additional network module or like smart module, because they do offer smart versions of this, like with Android and stuff, I think this is maybe for that as well. Because this area here is obviously designed to have something in it, and there's a lot of contacts down either side. Like that would be enough to carry some sort of like digital video signal. So potentially this is where they could also install some sort of smart module, and maybe this is where they'd add on a sort of Wi-Fi module that would communicate with this. I'm not sure, this is purely speculative. But it's interesting seeing that they've actually got space there to put some sort of module in, presumably for the smart versions of this projector. So that's quite cool there. But yeah, that's the only sort of digital logic required to make a projector work. It's quite impressive how simple this sort of thing can be. So with that out of the way, we can now see a bit more. So down there, that looks like some sort of power supply under there, or potentially that's maybe just some sort of, yeah, there's some sort of power supply logic. No, that's a reflection. I think that's maybe some sort of input filtering, so we'll take a look at that in a bit. And then we're now starting to see a little bit more how the optical path of this works. You can see we've got this sort of triangular reflector area here. This is presumably for the light source, so presumably the LED is behind here. This will then channel that LED light up to here, where we'll have the LCD panel, and then some more optics under here. So let's see if we can get that LCD out. So we'll need to be careful because there's these cables sort of snaking all over the place and taped down. So I'll try and lift this one up. Don't know what this one's for. Just get that out of the way so we can get to that screw. So I'll try and take these screws out on the side and see if we can get the LCD out. I'll do that live on camera because that could be quite interesting to see. So a screw on each side here, and I suspect this will give us access to the LCD underneath. So that'll come out there. And then over here we've got another one. Now interestingly, this is clearly some sort of bodge they've done in the factory, because there's a screw hole on the panel itself, like over here, but they've not actually screwed into that. Instead, they've screwed through the plastic to the side of that, just so the head of the screw kind of catches on the edge. I suspect what's happened is when they've put this, oh, it's also chewed, great. I suspect what's happened is when they've put this together in the factory, they've maybe like damaged the screw thread inside that hole, and instead of throwing out that whole bit of plastic and, you know, having to redo it from scratch, they've just done this bodge. I mean, it works. It does go to show this is not a very good quality product, but it works fine, so that can come out there. Yeah, the screw head on that's totally chewed off. Yeah, I wonder if that is actually what they've done. Let's see. If I try and put a screw into the where the screw should be, does that work? Okay, so that screw's going in there absolutely fine, so, and it's tightened up, so I have no idea why they've done that. Did someone just miss with a screwdriver? Don't know how you managed to do that, but anyway, it's a bit of a weird one, but yep, that's out there. I might try and find a replacement screw for that rather than putting that chewed one back in. But now that's done there, we should hopefully be able to remove what I suspect will be the LCD panel. So that's both the screws out. Yep, there we go. Lift this up. And there is the LCD panel and me reflected in it. That's quite interesting, so that's it there. So, yep, this is the LCD here. And I've looked around in the back here, there's a model number on the ribbon cable. It says, well, maybe a part number, RX05800600V2. I've looked that up. I can't really find a manufacturer, but I can find this sort of listed on AliExpress and stuff as replacement LCD panels for different projectors. So I suspect it's a fairly generic LCD panel, and it's just in this kind of plastic carrier that seems to be clipped around it. So it's interesting to see the LCD being so big, but I suspect this is another reason that this projector could be made so cheaply. Traditionally in higher end LCD projectors, usually you'll have 3 LCD panels, not just one. You'll have one for each colour, and the light will be split and then recombined. But also those LCDs are usually about 1 inch diagonal, they're tiny little things. Whereas this, is a full 1080p panel, but it's being used to reproduce all the colours, and it's a 5.8 inch LCD. So I suspect the reason for that is that because it's a larger screen, the pixel density is lower than if it was like a 1 inch screen, and that means it's presumably easier to produce because it's much less dense screen. Additionally, this is kind of the same sort of size of screen you'd see on a smartphone. So I wouldn't be surprised if the reason these projectors have suddenly sort of become so available with genuine 1080p panels in them is because smartphones are now, commodity smartphones now have 1080p screens around this size. So the technology is now there to manufacture high resolution screens around about this size. Whereas when you go back 10 years, a small LCD screen this size would have just been super expensive. So I suspect that's why they're able to use these sort of large format screens. It's just because they're already so mass produced for smartphones. Adapting one for projector use is super simple. Because while it seems sort of special, realistically, an LCD projector's got no sort of special LCD. It's literally just an LCD screen. But rather than having a diffuser and a backlight behind it, it's just the LCD panel. So if you were to power this on now and look at it, and you held up the light, you'd see the picture. It's just clear. So it's just an LCD screen without the backlight and diffuser. So, yep, that's the LCD panel there. Another thing to bear in mind with these LCDs is that these can quite often get dirty, especially in these cheap projectors, because you'll notice this projector has no sort of dust filtering, whereas a higher end LCD projector will have a dust filter. That's one of the ways you can usually tell if it's LCD or DLP, is DLP projectors have sealed optical paths, so they don't really need dust filters and often don't have them. But LCD projectors usually blow air across the LCD to keep it cool because it's sitting in a quite high power light beam. And as a result, dust would get deposited on the LCD, so they have filters, whereas this one doesn't. Although I think one of the updated models maybe does. I saw a listing that said it did, but yeah. So what you can see is on this screen, there is little specks of dust. So if you say found on your picture you've got little hairs or little specks, chances are that dust isn't going to be on the lens. If the dust is perfectly in focus, it's probably on the LCD. So it's not too painful to remove. You do have to take the main PCB out, which is a bit annoying. But yeah, if you've got one of these and you've got dust on it, this is what you need to do. You need to take this out and clean this off, and that would hopefully stop the dust. So now looking at this, we've got a lot more plastic to remove. So I'm definitely going to do that off camera because it's going to be really fiddly. Obviously this isn't really a teardown tutorial, so I'm not going to try and explain exactly how I took it apart. I can see down the back here, there is a couple of screws to remove this actual back plastic. I'll maybe do that later. But yeah, what I can see here is there's a couple of screws here, one there, one there, one there. So if I take all of those out, that should hopefully let me remove some of this top plastic and let me view down into sort of optical path down here. So I'll go and do that and then I'll come back. So I've now removed all the screws from here. I also took this piece out already because there was a screw hidden underneath, so that can come off there. And then there was one other screw under here. So now we can get this panel off here. So that's revealed the power supply, so now we figured out where that was hiding. All these cables sticking all over the place. It's just a bit fiddly to try and get this stuff out, but if we can carefully get this out from under here. It's going to be a nightmare to put this back together, but that's this bit of plastic. And now we've revealed the optical path, and what on earth is that? Oh, there's like some sort of grease all over the inside of that. What on earth is that? Oh. Gonna dig into that and see if it's either a grease that's leaked out of some wheel or what. I've not spilled anything into this, I know that much. I mean, it's basically I used it briefly and then stuck it in a cupboard. Yeah, no idea what that is. It's not on any of the optics. Bizarre. It's not leaked out a fan because I've not used it for a while. The fan seems fine. That's weird. It's wet. What on earth? Right, that'll be weird. So what I'll do is I'll go away, look at this a little bit just to roughly get an idea what's going on, and I'll come back and talk about it and work out what on earth that yellow goop's come from. Okay, so let's dig in a bit more detail and look at the optical path. So at the back here, you'll see we have where the LED is, and there's this sort of reflective area that presumably sort of spreads that light out from the LED over to the optical path. So we can try and get this out. I'll maybe get that out later. I'll take the rest of it out first. Then here we see we have Fresnel lens. So it's just a flat lens there. You can see it'll magnify anything behind it. And this will presumably just spread or focus the light or whatever into the LCD panel, which sits in here. So we take that Fresnel lens out there. Need to clean all these off before putting back in. Next up, we have this here. Now, at first glance, this just looks like a bit of glass, maybe a slightly tinted bit of glass. But this is actually a polarizing filter. So we can see this, if I bring my phone in and just turn a screen on like that, try and keep it awake, you'll see if we hold this over it, at certain angles, it goes completely blank, and at other angles, the picture shows through. And that's because it's a polarizing filter. So this basically aligns the light to go through the LCD screen. So yeah, that's how that works there. So that's the polarizing filter there. Put this back in just so I don't misplace all these parts. That seems to be okay. And then the LCD would sit in here. So the light's coming in, going through the Fresnel lens, going through the polarizing filter, and then hitting the LCD. Next up, we have this other Fresnel lens here, which I think you can just lift out. Maybe, I think it's maybe clamped in somewhere, not a bother. But this is attached to that secondary switch on the focusing adjustment, which flips this side to side. So we'll talk about this in a little second when we look at the focusing, but yeah, this will also manipulate the image. The light then comes through, reflects off this mirror at the back here, which just, you can pull that out, but it's literally just a mirror, so not a bother. And then the light will then go through the lenses out the front of the projector. So yeah, that's the optical path there. We can try and get this reflector piece out to see if we can see the LED. Don't quite know what's holding it in. Ah, it's going through this bit of plastic at the back, so we'll need to take this bit of plastic out and then I'll be able to get that out, so I'll do that just now. Okay, so I've removed the screws from there. So there's one hidden down there as well, so take this out. That now lifts off, that's just a plastic shroud, which also has the IR receiver on the front, so that can come off there. And now under here, we can see we have the LED and some heat sinks. So now we can hopefully remove this piece. Now I'll take that fan out as well just to get out of the way because the cable goes over it, so that's one of the fans. There's a model number if you want to look that up. And then this will come out. Now quickly before I do that, I'll take a look at the fans while we're talking about them. So there's these two fans here. I think these are exhaust. I think they have a direction. Yeah, that'll be exhaust because the way it's fitted. So these are two exhaust fans, this smaller one and this bigger one. And these are very self-explanatory. They just blow air through these heat sinks and outside the projector to keep it cool. There's another model number on there if you're interested. So previously I have briefly taken this apart, not to this level before. This was last year when I got it, because it was so loud and I wanted to see what I could do to quieten it down. So it has these two fans which make some of the noise, and I thought, well, that'll be easy. I can swap these out for new fans, put some nice notches in, make it a lot quieter. But it turns out these fans aren't the fans that cause all the noise. There's actually an additional fan over here, and this is what causes most of the noise, and this is one I sort of really looked at before. So this fan is the loudest one, and if we take it out, you'll see it's with this sort of blower style fan. Another model number there. Now, these fans themselves are usually quite loud, they're common in servers and stuff like that, they're not really designed for quietness. And unfortunately, it's quite hard to get replacements for this style of fan that are particularly quiet because they're never designed for that. And they're a bit of a sort of weird form factor to get. You know, it's not like a commodity PC fan. But yeah, this is the fan that seems to cause all the noise. And what you'll see here is this fan is actually responsible for cooling the LCD panel. So that sits in there like that, and it'll suck air in the back and blow it out the side. So that goes in like that. It's going to suck air in round about here, sort of through the power cable area. And it blows it down this channel, which is also channeled into the top piece that sits over this whole assembly, whichever direction it goes. There, so it'll channel down here as well. And the air is then channeled through here, and you can see the air will come in, round here, out here, and go across the LCD panel. And that's because this LCD is clearly sitting in the beam of a very high power LED light source. And LCDs don't like getting hot. Now, when I was testing this, I actually realised how critical this fan is, because what I was doing is just, I didn't go down to this level. All I did was find where the fan's connected to this power supply board over here, and just unplug them one by one, just to really see which one was producing the most noise. So I unplugged these. I was doing it very quickly, so I wasn't really leaving it, it wasn't going to catch fire or anything. But I unplugged this fan and went, oh, that is a lot quieter. And I just sort of sat back for a second and went, yeah, that's annoying how loud this fan is. And I'll put a bit of a sort of quick picture I took up now. I literally just grabbed my phone quickly to take a picture. I looked over at the projected image and saw this black splodge growing in the middle of the screen. And I immediately panicked, plugged the fan back in, and then it started shrinking again. And that's because this fan is so crucial to cool that LCD because of the heat coming from the LED. If this isn't running, the LCD immediately starts getting too hot in the centre where the beam is hitting it at the highest power and starts to sort of change and go black, which thankfully is a reversible process. I mean, potentially, as long as you don't leave it too long and actually physically damage it. So when I connected the fan again, it just cooled down again, and then the picture came back in that black area. But that shows that this fan is actually really crucial. So if you were trying to make this projector quieter, realistically, the fan that you generally need to replace is going to be this one, but you would need to replace it with one. You couldn't just disconnect this fan. And you need to make sure your replacement fan did have enough power to cool that LCD, because if that LCD gets too hot, you're going to have that issue with a black splodge forming. And this is also probably why you have such an issue with this getting dust on the LCD, because this fan blows air directly across that LCD panel, and there's no dust filtering in this area. So if you were having issues with this getting a lot of dust in it, and you wanted to try and avoid that as best as you can, you'd probably be best trying to attach some sort of dust filtering material to this vent here, and the vent area on the back here. That would hopefully stop most of the dust getting onto the LCD, because dust sort of around the LEDs, that's not really a problem. Even dust sort of in here where between the LCD and the lens wouldn't be too bad because it's not going to be in focus, whereas dust hitting that LCD panel and potentially this polarizer is going to be super visible on your image. But yeah, that's what that fan's for there. But yeah, that was me talking about the fans, so now lift this fan out of the way, and we can hopefully now get this reflector out. So that comes out there, and as you can see, it's just a reflector, nothing that fancy at all, pretty light. That can come out there, and over here we have the LED itself. Now there's a couple of screws on the bottom around about here that were a different type of screw. I suspect that's what's holding this in, so I've taken them out, and in theory, yep, that lifts up. So that there is the LED. There's a model number there, DRD M62-19D. So that's that model number there. It's interesting to see the shape of that LED. It's actually somewhat sort of 16:9 aspect ratio. So I wonder if that's actually a custom LED designed to sort of produce light in the correct shape. I mean, that makes sense. You wouldn't want like a square LED on a rectangular screen because it's presumably going to get a hot spot. So that's that there. There's the power connection to the bottom of it there. That's coming from the power supply board. And then, interestingly, there's these R plus and R minus terminals, and that goes down to this, which is a model number on there. You can hopefully get off the video, or part number anyway, 100° C. So that'll be some sort of thermistor type device, and it's not thermally bonded or anything, but it must just sit. There's a little recess in the case down there for it. It must just sit against the bottom of this heatsink and just monitors temperature. And presumably it's just I imagine it's just a sort of simple thermal cutoff. This doesn't seem to have any sort of speed adjusting fans or anything like that. I suspect it's just if the LED starts getting too hot, it'll sort of kill power to it. So in fact, it's actually sitting on this board here between positive and the LED. So I suspect that's actually not even a thermistor. It might even just be a thermal fuse or something. Because yeah, it's literally just sitting in line on this. It doesn't talk to anything else. So yep, that's what that is there. So that's how that works. And then you can see that's thermally bonded onto these heat sinks that are involved in cooling the LED, because obviously it's a very high power LED. You need to keep it cool. So we can get that back into the case down there, get that thermistor or thermal fuse or whatever it is in position. That's that there. And as you can see, this is where the light's going to come through that reflector and through the rest of the optical path I've already looked at. So now we'll quickly take a look at the power supply stuff. I'm not an expert when it comes to power supply, so I won't be able to talk much about it. But over here, you can see the mains comes in. It's just the IC connector down here. So this is still mains at this point. Comes into this board here, and then it comes out again over these cables here. I don't see any sort of like rectification or anything here or any transformers. I think this is just some sort of interference suppression type stuff. So that's just there, and then this comes across the main power supply board here. So if we disconnect the fans, which, Yeah, I forgot I did this when I did it previously. I think I broke the connectors off. It's fine because it's just pins on the board, and then there's also like a connector that this would go in, that it would plug into, but I kind of pulled the jacket, the connector off, as well as the plug. So it's fine. I forgot I did that when I think I first took this apart. But, oh, that one came out fine. So yeah, I think I broke one of them off, because all I did last time I was in here was just disconnect the fans and nothing else. But apart from that, I mean, it still works absolutely fine because the pins are still soldered. So yeah, that's what happened there. So yep, that'll come out. And that's most of it out of the way. So in theory, we can lift this power supply board out. It's not screwed in at all. Yep, there we go. That's the rear of the board. I know nothing about power supplies really, so I can't really talk much about it. I'm not Big Clive. But then around the front, you'll see massive capacitor there. And then on top, you're going to see you have the transformer. So there's transformer, voltage regulator, all that sort of stuff. But it's a power supply. I don't really know much about power supplies. So yep, that's the main power supply there. There's a part number down there, JRF169YGL-1. This board here has a similar part number of JRF169YGL-2. So I suspect this is like two parts of the same essential power supply product. I looked that up. I can't really, well, I looked up JR1F169 off this other board here. Couldn't find anything, so I suspect this is presumably custom for this board or something. But yeah, that's it there. Dead simple. You just got mains in there. This goes up the power up the main board. These connections do all the fans, and this here is the power out to the LED, which you can see is actually labelled LED plus and LED minus. So that's presumably dedicated to a sort of projector type of application. So yep, that's power supply there. We'll get that put back in carefully and get the cables routed back in. But yep, that's how the power supply works. So now with all that out of the way, the final part we need to take a look at is the focusing. Now I've noticed we can take the side panel off, so I may as well just do that. Let's see the speakers as well. So there's just a single screw in here that'll take that off, and I'll almost certainly forget to put that screw back in when I put it back together. Take bets on how many screws I'll have left over after putting this back together. But that should now come out there like that. That was easy enough to do. And just out of interest, you can see the speakers. So just two speakers there. And you see there's actually quite a bit of dust on these from the fan that cools the LCD. So this is definitely where dust is coming in. But yeah, you've got a pair of speakers there. Check out the original video. I've got an audio sample of these. I was actually quite impressed, especially for such a cheap device. These speakers are actually pretty competent. You know, not for like, you know, high-end audio, but you could definitely watch a movie on that and not be too upset. And then here we've got the focusing mechanism. So I'll leave it in situ for now because it's probably actually works better in context. But what you've got here is you've got the main lens, and you can kind of see here, if I wind it back, it's just on a screw thread. So when you turn this piece here, all that does is just move that lens back and forward. Like that. And this is one interesting thing with this projector, is because obviously it's an LED light source, and it's a budget model, so it's not a particularly powerful LED light source. They need to really get as much light as possible that comes from this LED to actually hit the wall. And as a result, this is a very wide aperture lens. So if you look through the front of it, you'll see it is an extremely wide lens. Like, it's just basically straight through. It's a super wide aperture lens. And lenses and projectors work very much in a similar way to photography. The wider the aperture, the more light that gets through the lens. So if you've got a wide aperture lens on when you're taking photos, you'll get a brighter image, more light comes through with a wider aperture lens. However, the trade-off with that is the wider the aperture, the shorter the more precise you have to be with the focus, much less, only a smaller part of the image will be in focus at any one time. Whereas if you have a much narrower aperture, the lens is much more closed, much less light gets through, but a much wider range of the image is in focus. So as an example of this is if you want to take a photo where you've got a subject and the subject's in focus and the background's really blurred, which is quite common, you'll use a very wide aperture lens because it means that you get the subject in focus, but anything behind them will be out of focus and anything in front of them will be out of focus. On the other hand, if you want to take a photo of a subject, say, sitting in front of something, and you want to see what's behind them in focus as well, you'd use a much narrow aperture lens because that lets less light in, but what it also means is that you can have the subject in focus and what's behind them in focus. And this is something I have to contend with quite a lot when I'm filming my videos. I used film on a mirrorless camera where the lens was quite wide aperture and had a large sensor, which also helps, but anyway, that's photography stuff. But I would have issues where if I was filming a product like this area here would be in focus and this area here would be out of focus. So what I had to do was close up the lens, make the aperture smaller, which would let less light in, but allow much more of this to be in focus. The projector lens works very similarly. Because this lens is such a wide aperture, to allow this sort of relatively low powered light source to get a decently bright image, it means that you have to be super precise with the focus on this. With a lot of projectors, like my Optical projector, it's just a tiny little lever on the top, little slider, that just slides like a couple centimetres, and that's enough because you don't really need to be that precise with it. Whereas with this, you can see how much range you've got to adjust the focus. And that's because you have to be super precise to get the image in focus. Even just the slightest tweak like that is enough to completely change the focus on the image. In fact, with this projector, because of the lens, you can even struggle to get the entire image in focus. And I talked about this in my review of it, where on a large screen, because obviously the corners of the screen are further away from the lens than the middle of the screen, you can end up with a situation where you can't get the centre of the screen and the corners in focus at the same time. So this means that for like office and presentation use or displaying like computer graphics, this projector is it's not really suitable because you would really notice that those out of focus corners and edges. However, for sort of movies and pictures and that sort of content, it's not too bad because you don't really notice the out of focus edges as much. But yeah, with this projector, because of this wide aperture lens, the focus, you have to be super precise with focus. Even just slightly moving the projector will be enough to cause it to go out of focus. However, yeah, you just need to be very precise with the focus, and you quite often can't get the whole image in focus. Usually either just the middle or just the extremes. You can't really get it entirely in focus. But that brings me on to this little adjustment here, which kind of confused me, and also it clearly lifts out if I've not got the side on, but yeah, I'll just be careful with that. But you see this adjustment here tilts this Fresnel lens behind it. Now, when I first looked at this, I obviously read the manual or briefly skimmed it, and it referred to this as keystone adjustment. Now, before I saw this projector, my knowledge of keystone adjustment is where you've got the projector off-centre on the screen, and or off-centre from the wall you're tilting it up or pointing to the side, and the projected image becomes some sort of trapezoid type shape. And what you do is you use the keystone adjustment, which adjusts the size of the sort of dimensions of the picture to square it up. And anytime I've done this before on a projector, it's a digital adjustment, so it essentially digitally adjusts the shape of the image that's being projected, and that compensates for the projector being off axis. Usually with the trade-off that it'll obviously reduce the resolution because you're using a smaller part of the LCD or the DLP chip. So when I came to this, seeing this as a keystone adjustment, it doesn't have any digital keystone adjustment, I tried using this and thought, that's rubbish, it doesn't actually square the image up at all. All it seemed to do was just throw the top of the image out of focus or the bottom of the image out of focus. It didn't really give a square image. And then additionally, I saw other cheap projectors, not the Q9 but similar models, that advertised 4D keystone, which is digital keystone adjustment where you can adjust the shape of the actual projected image. But then they also still had this little flippy thing, which confused me. I was like, why do you have both? I can't remember if I figured this out or someone commented. I think someone actually commented. Yeah, someone did comment and point this out. This is again due to the wide aperture lens. Because if you think about it, with this projector, if you've got it pointing straight at a screen sitting flat on a surface, then sure enough, the top and bottom of the image will be the same distance from the lens. But if on the other hand you were to tilt this up to project up at a wall, or tilt it down or have it on a ceiling bracket or anything like that, what you'll find is, if you think about it, the top of the picture will be a different distance from the lens as the bottom of the picture. Now, obviously I've mentioned that it's quite hard to get the top and bottom of the extremes and the centre in focus as it is, even with it completely horizontal. But if you imagine, if you've got it tilted up like that, it becomes almost impossible to keep the top of the image and the bottom of the image in focus. You end up with a situation where you can only have the very centre in focus and the top and bottom are completely out of focus, or only the top's in focus and the bottom and the middle are completely out of focus. So that's what this is. It's not really intended to square the image up. All it does is just kind of adjust the distance involved with the top and the bottom of the image in relation to each other, so that if you've got the projector tilted up or down, you can use this to compensate for that, to kind of help you get the image fully in focus. It doesn't work amazingly, but once you realise that's what it's for, it does actually help, which is quite good. Now, of course, this doesn't have any digital keystone adjustment, so you can't get the image square, but this at least lets you get it in focus. Although it doesn't have any way, so if the projector's off axis horizontally, there's no compensation for that. You will just have the left or the right of the image out of focus. So you do really need to have this at least horizontally in line with the screen. But at least this means that if you do have to have it tilted up or tilted down towards the screen, you do have some sort of adjustment there. So I just found that kind of interesting because I totally misinterpreted what this was, but that's what that is. That interestingly seems to lift off like that. That's lines there. Just for the completeness, I'll take this out, just out of curiosity to see what it's like, but I suspect all it's going to be is some sort of lens inside some sort of threaded enclosure that allows it to focus back and forward. But I'll take it out anyway, just because I clearly want even more pain trying to put this back together after I finish taking it apart. And hopefully it works again, because I mean, I haven't really used this in a while. I used it a fair bit when I got it, but then I got a bigger TV and it got to a point that the novelty of the screen from this sure it was bigger than my new TV, but it's not as much bigger as it used to be with my old TV. So yeah, that's there. And yep, that's all it is. Literally all you've got is the lens is as I suspected. It's just big lens. It's quite heavy, but just a lens with a screw thread on it. This outer piece just has a screw thread on it as well, like that. So that just screws in and out there. And this piece, which is just the control you use on the outside, literally just has some slots on there that slot over these sticky out bits on the lens, like that. And that just allows you to turn that and slide the lens in and out. That's literally all the lens is. It's dead simple, and you see it just basically magnifies like that. It's a super simple lens. And this is clearly one of the areas that they will cheap out on these projectors, is the optics just aren't going to be comparable to a high-end projector. I mean, lenses are not cheap things. So if you're trying to do a projector for 150 quid, where you have to also factor in the cost of the LCD, the LED, the power supply, everything, you are going to cheap out on the optics. And that's generally what you find with these cheap projectors. Is in terms of resolution, this projector is actually really good. And when I tested it, I put it against a 720p DLP Optoma, which is a much more expensive projector, and you could tell the image from this was much higher resolution, like that was noticeable. But because of the lower end optics, you do end up having the images always a little bit soft. It's not quite as sharp. You can't get the whole image in focus. And also just because it's a single LCD, not a 3 LCD model, the colours can be a little bit washed out. But yeah, it is actually fairly competent. Just, you need to really sort of manage your expectations and not trust the pictures and the sort of marketing material that they put around these things. So yeah, that's lens down there. Now that flips over there, and then that control still works. So yeah, that's it there. So I guess what I now need to do is get this put back together, and well, hope it still works. Okay, so after a lot of effort, that's now reassembled. Seemed to all go together absolutely fine. The only thing I did is I had that really chewed screw that was holding the LCD in, so I've just left that out. I nicked a screw from one of the PCB points because it didn't really need 3 screws down there, so I've taken one of them out. And then I've used a better screw for the LCD, so there's no chewed screws in this. Just because I might need to take that LCD out periodically to clean it, so I didn't want to have any issues. And I've also put the screw on the LCD back in the correct place, which fitted absolutely fine, so I can't really see why they wedged it on the side there. The only thing I could really see is this sort of earth cable comes up this hole in the PCB, and then onto the top there. Don't know why I didn't bring it over, but anyway, I don't know if maybe they were worried there wouldn't be enough clearance because the screw that holds the LCD in when it's in its correct position is directly below that hole, but it seems to work absolutely fine, so no idea. So yeah, that's it there. So I've not put the top back on, so we'll quickly try and just see if I've broken it. I'll just use the remote because I've left the top button board disconnected, so let's turn it on and see what happens. Well, it's got some sign of life. And, well, it's lit up anyway. Try and get an image in focus. It's probably too close to really get an image in focus on this, but you won't be able to really see it under the studio lighting, but there is a blue square projected on the wall there. Just let me make that out. It's not going to be in focus just because it's so close to the wall. Try and move it back a bit. I can see something coming through there just about, but it's doing something, it's working. There's no signal message there, and then I can pull the menu up and flick through it. So yeah, it is working. I've not broken it, so that's good. So finally, I'll get this finally sort of fully assembled to get the top back on. Oops, looks like I definitely spoke too soon and put it back together too quickly. There's definitely something wrong with the image because, yeah, it's not meant to look like that. I think what I've done is I've put the Fresnel lens in the wrong way around because there was two different ways it could go, obviously, and I took it completely out. So I think I'll need to actually basically take that and flip it around. I suspect that's what's wrong with it, hopefully. There also seems to be quite a big blob of dust just below that HD2 symbol, so I'll try and work out where that is and clean it out as well. But, yep, that's annoying because I completely reassembled it, so time to take it apart again and try and fix that. But I'll do that off camera and come back once I've hopefully been able to fix it, because, yeah, that image is, well, not quite right. Okay, so I've just taken this apart to flip that Fresnel lens round. It was this one here. It was the wrong way round. I've turned it back on. It seems to be fine now, so that's good. Cleaned it off a little bit as well, so that's fine. But what I'll do very quickly before I put it back on, I know I'm jumping around all over the place, is I'm just going to turn it on with it open, just because it's kind of interesting to see. I'll need to be quick because obviously the air guide isn't in, so it won't be potentially getting, the LCD might not get as good cooling as it should. But if we quickly turn it on right now. There's the sensor. There we go. Oh, it's very bright. But what you can just about see in there is the Elephas logo on the LCD. If I open up the menu, there. So it's now projecting an image on the wall, but you can see in there, you can actually see the projected image. See if a ND filter would help. There you go. You can actually see there's a projected image upside down on the LCD. And then there's that filter there, or that Fresnel lens that you can adjust. And that's kind of what it looks like. So that's the LCD there through the Fresnel lens. Behind there you can see how bright that is. I can barely even look at that. And then if you look very quickly around here at the mirror, you might be able to, I've not looked at the mirror yet, don't know what it looked like. Yeah, you can just kind of see a reflection of the LCD in that there. So yeah, that's what it looks like open. And I'm just doing that very quickly, I'm just going to turn it off. The LCD still actually looks okay, it doesn't have a black splodge yet, but I'm just going to turn it off because the LCD won't be getting cooled when it's like this. But yeah, that was actually pretty cool to see when it's open as well. So yeah, what I'll now do is I'll actually put it together, hopefully for the last time, and we can finally wrap this video up. And there we go, that's it all now reassembled, and as you can see, the picture is now absolutely perfect. So it was just that Fresnel lens being the wrong way around. So yeah, that's fixed it. So there you go, that was a teardown of this really cheap projector. And it's actually been really interesting, because obviously this is such a cheap device with reasonable specifications, so it's really interesting to see how they managed to cut the cost or actually be able to build it for that price, such as doing things like using a relatively large single LCD panel that's the same sort of type you'd find in a phone. So it's quite interesting to see how they've used the wide aperture lens to deal with the sort of relatively weak LED light source, and then how they've had to do that sort of weird keystone adjustment to compensate for the wide aperture lens. It's a lot of different compromises and compensation for different things, but yeah, it's been a really interesting teardown. So yeah, there you go. Thank you very much for watching, and if you're interested in buying this projector, they don't sell it under the Elephas name anymore, but it's sold under a few different brands, potentially with some updated versions with Android and stuff, so I'll put some links in the description if you're interested. But yeah, thanks for watching.